Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Davis. I'm our literary curator here at the Wittliff Collections at Texas State University. And we are here to celebrate the brand new book in the Wittliff Collections Book Series published by Texas A&M University Press. It is Nepantla Familias, an anthology of Mexican-American writers in between worlds. We are honored to be joined by the editor of this fantastic, groundbreaking book, Sergio Troncoso. Welcome, Sergio.
Thank you, Steve, for inviting me to the program. And thank you from the Literary Collection and the Wittliff Collections for all the support that you have and your organization has given this book to begin, something new. I think in Mexican American literature, that's what I appreciate, and I think it wouldn't have happened without the Wittliff Collections and their support, and of course Texas A&M Press. But we got the ball rolling forward, and I'm thrilled about that.
Yeah, same here. We're also thrilled by this partnership we have with you and with A&M Press and support of this book, which has gotten incredible notices already. So for today's program, we will be, as you see, we'll have a conversation with Sergio Troncoso, and we will also be hearing from several of the writers who appear in this book. There are about, I think, 26 writers in all who are in this anthology, and I wish we could hear from all of them, but we don't have that kind of time. So what we've done is we have brief readings contributed by 9 of the writers that we'll be showing you throughout the event here. And that will at least give you an idea of the quality and really the eloquence and wisdom that shines through in this volume. And we will also be showing in a little bit an interview with Sandra Cisneros that Sergio Troncoso conducted specifically for this program here today. And so I'd like to, as we turn to Sergio, just give you a very brief introduction of this distinguished writer and editor and thinker. Born and raised in El Paso, Sergio Troncoso is the author and editor of 8 books. He won the Premio Aztlán Prize for his first book, The Last Tortilla and Other Stories. Most recently, he won the International Latino Book Award for his latest collection, A Peculiar Immigrant's. I always get that title wrong. A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant's Son. Sergio has degrees from Harvard and Yale. He teaches at the Yale Writers Workshop, and he is the current president of the Texas Institute of Letters, a literary honor society founded in 1936 to recognize distinctive literary achievement. And I will say that we will have time at the end for any questions, so feel free to submit your questions and we'll get to that. I also want to mention, you may have seen the notice before this program began, but the Wittliff Collections is selling copies of Nepantla Familias, which are signed by Sergio Troncoso. So you can, we have operators standing by, or probably the website would be a good way to click on that and find the information for ordering. So please feel free to do that. And these will be collector's items, so you want to make sure to grab one. Sergio, as you join us here, I just want to really start by saying thank you for generously donating your archive to the Wittliff Collections. We are so honored to be the place that will hold your literary papers for posterity. So thanks for that. And can you just, what we'll do is we'll show off just a little bit of your papers here in a few minutes. And at that point, we'll have you kind of maybe tell us a little bit more about what's in there. So for now, though, let's begin with this book, Nepantla Familias. Can you tell us your concept for this, your vision for this book?
Well, my idea was to create a very forward-looking anthology. And by that I meant, first, of all the 26 writers, that most, if not all, of the work would be unpublished, would be new work. And I also wanted to, and so it ended up being that I think of the 30 selections, 25 are unpublished. And of the other 5, only all of them but one have been published in small literary journals, and recently published in small literary journals. So it's really relatively new work. And it's all in this concept of Nepantla, which comes from, my philosophical, muse, Gloria Anzaldúa, and living in between cultures, living in between languages, living in between geographies, psychologies, even identities, which is quintessential of the Mexican American experience. And I wanted these writers to write about the many varieties, and not just about identity, but really about the struggle to define identity, the struggle to capture it, to lose it, the struggle to try to make something very new, a new kind of self that I think is very emblematic and universal for the American experience. So on the one hand, really sticking to Mexican American writers only and to their experience, but also thinking about how Nepantla and living in between in this liminal land between languages and cultures and geographies and psychology, how it is really essential to the American experience and has always been essential to the American experience. So it really should appeal and apply to anyone who is interested in being and understanding how the United States came about, and not just to understand Mexican Americans, but to understand themselves and how a self is created from living in between these, in between whatever it is that you're living in between. So that was sort of my idea at the beginning, and what I got was great work. And I did reject some things. I did reject, often things that didn't fit the bill. So I was very choosy with what I accepted in the collection. And I wanted writers that I admired. I wanted writers that I would read and I have learned from in terms of the craft of writing. So we have here, nonfiction essays at the beginning and poetry in the middle. And then at the end, we had short stories, great short stories toward the end. And I also thought about, once I started getting the work and we started exchanging emails with authors, sometimes pushing them to consider changes. And sometimes for some authors, getting them to write. Because one author, and I won't mention names, but she wanted to really write about something really personal. And she wasn't convinced she should do it. And I told her, this is exactly what you should be doing. So that involved, almost encouraging her and giving her the courage to do what she did. And it ended up being a fantastic piece. So some authors needed a lot of, interaction with me, and other authors just did it all by themselves. And then then I talked to them once I got their pieces. So it is a groundbreaking anthology. It is something new that readers have not yet experienced. And it is something that will open up your minds, I hope, make you more empathetic, not just towards the Mexican American community, but also towards yourself, toward other cultures, toward the need to cross borders ourselves and challenge ourselves and not get complacent about who we are, who we want to be as a country. And I think it gets to this central problem we have in the country today, that we are not a we. We're struggling to be a we as a community. And unless we solve that problem over the next generation, we're going to have a lot of difficulties in this country. So that was my reason for trying to create this anthology, to get at this question: how do we become a we in this country? The messy ways we become a we, the messy ways we fail, and the messy ways we bridge these gaps in cultures and languages, etc. And I'm thrilled with what happened. I'm thrilled with the result, and I think readers that encounter it will also have a great experience.
Yeah, I think the quality of the writing just really shines throughout. And that's something I've heard a lot of people comment on. I've seen that mentioned in the reviews. And I think it's time for us. Let's go to our first reading that we have. This comes from David Dorado Romo, and he has the first piece in the book. And what he's done is create a bit of a music video to accompany his reading of his piece here or there. And it features the band Glossolalia that he plays with. And you will hear David's voice, and you will also hear him playing the alto sax in this piece. So let's go to this now.
I'm from a place in the middle of nowhere and in the midst of everything. It's a place full of contradictions and deliberate mistranslations. It's a part of the world that's full of liminal zones, underground tunnels and unexpected thresholds, passageways that you enter sometimes without having the slightest clue that they're going to transform you deeply. Sometimes you don't realize you've entered liminal zones until many years later. And every time you cross a border, it's the same. I lived in Jerusalem for 2 years, right next to the wall. When I would cross the checkpoints that separated the Jewish from the Arab sectors, the Israeli soldiers there would ask those of us deemed suspicious the same kind of profoundly existential questions that the customs agents do here at the El Paso Juarez Bridge. Except over there it's in Hebrew. Miefuata, where are you from? Lama takan, why are you here? Leana tanosea, where are you going? Where am I from? I'm from here. I'm from everywhere. But of course I know that's not what the armed gatekeepers at borders want to find out when they interrogate you. As fronterizos, we know exactly what they want. We've internalized the unwritten rules for border crossing rituals a long time ago. We know to keep our answers short, simple, and unambiguous, to make eye contact but not too much because it might be interpreted as defiance or contempt. And finally, we know to avoid humor because at border crossings, all jokes are taken seriously. Crossing borders in the war zone is particularly hazardous. The tension of living in a constant state of war seeps into your body almost unconsciously. It's like walking in an unmarked minefield. At any moment, an explosion could go off. Everything was different when I came back from the Middle East. I brought the war home with me. Maybe there had always been a war here and I just hadn't seen it before. The concrete barricades at the Santa Fe Street Bridge, the barbed wire, the border patrol checkpoints, the surveillance cameras and sensors along the river levee, the hovering helicopters, the floating bodies in the Rio Grande. Before it all seemed so normal to me, I hardly noticed. But I came back with new eyes. And now I understood how abnormal everything was. Growing up in El Paso, I used to feel comfortable here. While I was at Jefferson High School, La Jeff, as everyone called it, I used to be in the swim team. After practice at the Washington Park pool, my happy-go-lucky friend Art and I would hang out at Chico's Tacos and talk about everything and nothing under the sun. That was the thing to do. On Saturdays, I used to hang out at Cielo Vista Mall, one of the local temples to American-style capitalism. I remember there was a movie theater inside Cielo Vista Mall where we watched the first Star Wars movie. There was also an arcade with video games where we would shoot down alien invaders for a quarter. It's not at all what comes to mind when talking about a transformative liminal space. But somehow as I look back, that's exactly what it turned out to be. Cielo Vista was the only place in town during my youth with a bookstore, Walden Books. That's where I bought my first collection of works by Hemingway, Freud, Plato, Nietzsche. Books that, for better or for worse, changed my life. In Spanish, Cielo Vista means sky view. On August 3rd, 2019, a man armed with a Romanian AK-47 and a white supremacist manifesto walked into this same shopping strip and massacred 22 fronterizos. One of the people who lost their lives at Cielo Vista that day was my friend, Art Benavides, whom I remember as a good-natured kid from La Jeff, who used to talk to me about everything and nothing under the sun.
What do you think of that?
Oh, I loved it. And it doesn't surprise me that David Romo is so creative musically and with words, because that's who he's been all his life. And one of the reasons I put his essay at the beginning, here, there, was because on the one hand, it was definitional. It really brought people into the concept of Nepantla, explained the etymology of the Nahuatl, but also the personal, how, for example, he was trying to live in between religions, Pentecostal, and what he believed as a Pentecostal with this sort of paramour, Elizabeth. And so it was sort of personal. I like that too. And the last thing was that it also understood that Nepantla means more than just the Mexican-American experience. It's about Jerusalem and the Nepantla between the Palestinians and the Jewish population. So it applies to many different places. So I think for all of those reasons, I wanted that essay first, because it not only brought us into El Paso and a quintessential Mexican-American experience, but went beyond, went abroad, went to Jerusalem, because he studied there. And so for all these reasons, I thought it was a great introduction to what I was trying to do. And I think David Romo understood it perfectly.
Yeah, he did. And, some of the photos that you saw in that video are also on display at the Wittliff Collections, because I want to mention that the Wittliff is not just a place that holds literary papers. We are also a museum, or active with programming. And our current exhibition that's up right now is called Nepantla Familias, and it celebrates this anthology. We have photographs of all 26 writers who are in the book, and many of the individual writers also contributed things for the display. Some of David Romo's photos you'll see when you come here. What I think I'd like to do is I prepared this quick virtual tour of the exhibition that we have, just to give you all a sense of what you will see when you come visit the Wittliff. Here we are. This is the entrance to the Wittliff Collections on the top floor of the University Library at Texas State, where we hold the archives for many of the leading writers, photographers, filmmakers, and musicians from the southwestern borderlands. We have several exhibition galleries, we stage public programs, and we host researchers from all over the world. Our aim is to educate, illuminate, and inspire. And here we are now coming into the Nepantla Familias exhibition, where we are showcasing all 26 writers who are in this fantastic book. We begin, of course, with the editor, Sergio Troncoso, and we actually have a special exhibition case devoted to Sergio because he recently donated his literary papers to the Woodland Collections. So we wanted to use this as an opportunity to showcase some of the great treasures found in his archive. You see these cool family photos. Here's the high school newspaper Sergio edited, his first draft of his first published short story, The Abuelita, an outline for the novel that eventually became From This Wicked Patch of Dust, one of my favorite Southwestern novels. We also have David Dorado Romo here, who contributed these wonderful family photos, including one of his aunt, Adela Dorado, who figures prominently in his piece in Nepantla Familias. There she is as an older woman holding young David's hand as they're walking. David at age 19 at Hebrew University. Here's Stephanie Elizondo Greist, who wrote very movingly of her father, pictured there with her, who died of Alzheimer's, and her piece is called Dia de Muertos. Her display here includes her eulogy written for her father. It's quite moving, as is the story that she has in the anthology. And there's Francisco Cantu, who traveled to Monterrey recently with his mother to look for the old family home. And his display here includes his journal from that trip. There he is with his mother looking out over the city. There's Lorraine Lopez, whose story, Nobody's Favorite, really examines the issues of sibling rivalry in a very humorous way. There's Lorraine with the pink scarf there with her siblings. We also have a big display here that features Sandra Cisneros. You see Sandra there as an infant with her mother and father. This is a major archive we have at the Wittliff Collection, the Sandra Cisneros papers. This is the photograph, the family photo that inspired Sandra's Caramelo. This is the family in Acapulco, and it includes everyone but Sandra because they forgot about her when they took their family picture. So many great treasures in the Sandra Cisneros collection that we have here. And this is one of those archives that just draws researchers from all over the world to come study. There's Sandra at age about 15 with her grandfather in Mexico, who later figures quite prominently in Carmelo. It's an incredible collection that we have. And here's Octavio Quintanilla, who contributed this great family photograph, his father with the kids. That's Octavio, the tallest one there, leaning against the tree. And here's Diana Marie Delgado, who contributed a photograph that's also on the cover of her book of poems. This is a picture of her as an infant on her way to her christening with her parents. So here's Diana Lopez. One of her earliest jobs is working as a lab tech, collecting blood samples during the height of the AIDS epidemic. Diana, who grew up in Corpus Christi, later wrote a wonderful story called Dutiful Daughter, based in part on those experiences. We also have her really working drafts of this story that's in the anthology. You see Severo Perez here, also another major archive we have at the Wittliff. There's Severo as a young boy with his mother in downtown San Antonio. Severo is best known probably for this wonderful adaptation of Tomas Rivera's Y no se lo trago la tierra, this incredibly wonderful film called And the Earth Did Not Swallow Him. That was him directing on the set. This film has won numerous honors worldwide. It's a classic of Chicano cinema. And there's Severo at age 13, which is around the time of the story that you will see in the Nepantla Familias called Melancholy Baby. And here's Reina Grande with her mother, and the subject of her story, Losing My Mother Tongue. It's a quite powerful piece. And these photographs that Reina loaned to us for the exhibit really help illustrate this often difficult dynamic. So many other great writers who are in this exhibition and are in this anthology. I'm just going to go through some of the names and faces really quick now. There's Irene Lara Silva, and also Domingo Martinez, Daniel Chacon, Octavio Solis, Cheryl Luna, Matt Mendez, Deborah Paredes, Oscar Casares with his pretty little pony he writes about, Alex Espinosa, Rigoberto Gonzalez, Jose Antonio Rodriguez, Stephanie Lee, Ruben de Gallardo, and Elena Maria Viramontes. And so there you have it. That's a quick look. The exhibition is up through the end of June, so you're welcome to come visit and see it in person. The Wittliff Collections does adhere to all COVID-19 protocols. And if you're coming from off campus, really, weekends are a great time to visit. Parking's much easier. There's just a lot less going on campus. And to come visit the Wittliff. Check our website because we do have directions and guidelines for visitors who are coming. And Sergio, in that exhibition, as I mentioned, we have a full case devoted to you in your archive. And it's a really, we saw just a tiny bit of it there. But can you talk about some of the things that we saw that people can see there?
Well, I have, I wanted to provide the Wittliff with stuff from that ended up in my books or ended up in my work that was nowhere else, that was unique, that existed only as a draft. And so among the recent things I sent in was the very first story I wrote by hand, The Abuelita, that appeared in my first book, The Last Tortilla and Other Stories. And you have the draft in pencil that I first did. And so I thought that would be illuminating to people. Often you'll see that my stories, because I sent in other drafts of other work, for example, hand drafts of many essays from Crossing Borders, personal essays. I've always toyed with the craft of my work. And for many years, and I still occasionally do, handwrite everything first because it slows me down. It slows my thinking. It forces me to choose. And it hurts my hand, when you write 300 pages by hand. But then you're much pickier about each line, each rhythm, each paragraph than if you're just typing on the computer, which I sometimes call McWriting. Writing by hand really takes you back and forces you to think about the entire process before you actually write it. Whereas I think in some ways, at least for me, when I write by computer, it's a little bit thoughtless. And so I turned in all of those hand drafts to the Wittliff. I also turned in, I think at this point, hundreds of photos and some videos that are unique of my family, of my growing up. I found the first place I really started becoming a writer at Isleta High School, collections of my junior year and my senior year. Senior year, I was editor of the Powwow, the high school newspaper. In junior year, I was editorial page editor. So that's where I first started writing and created controversy. I wrote about an undocumented immigrant that had been hit repeatedly by a Border Patrol agent, and because they couldn't capture him, so they hit him with a car, and he was on a bicycle, and I put that in the newspaper, and it got that Border Patrolman fired. And so I was covering stuff in that newspaper that the El Paso Times ignored. And because it happened literally in my neighborhood, I wrote about teen sex. I wrote about sometimes money from the student council mysteriously disappearing in the main office, which created a lot of controversy, and the principal kind of wanted to get me kicked out. So I started understanding the power of writing. I started understanding that if you write the truth about what's happening and the taboos and what adults are trying to hide, that not only do you get at the truth, but people come after you. And it didn't matter. I sort of liked, that I got people to think about it. So I started, I wanted to make the paper into something that spoke about the people who were left out of debates, which are the students, the real stuff happening in the hallways that people wouldn't write about, not just the pep rallies and the nice things that most administrations want to talk about. And so it's really the first place where I started understanding the power of writing. So every issue, and I kept them. I think they only exist at the Wittliff. They don't exist anywhere else. The newspaper, the high school newspaper, won awards. I won 2 state awards for writing, and the entire history of the Powwow, which is I think over a 50-year history, the newspaper had won 5, and I won 2 of those state awards.
And I want to mention, since you brought that up, we have another writer in the Wittliff collection whose archives we are privileged to have, who grew up in El Paso, wrote for the high school newspaper, and won statewide awards. That's John Recchi. who reached out to me over the last couple of days and said he was just really looking forward to having a conversation with you about Nepantla Familias.
Yeah, well, it's that first place where you really understand writing and the power of telling the truth through your words and not backing down, even when you get flack, especially because you get flack. Because, of course, everyone, especially the powers that be, are always trying to hide stuff and are always trying to exclude people from the conversation, especially young people, people without power. And for me, it was to give them voice.
It's time now to hear from some of the more writers in Nepantla Familias. We're going to hear from 3 writers now. And Sergio, can you just sort of briefly introduce the 3 people we'll be hearing from?
So first is Stephanie Elizondo, who wrote Dia de Muertos, about how she constructed her Chicana identity to grieve for her father. And then also Francisco Cantú, and how he travels to La Calle Martín de Zavala with his mother to try to reach back to understand that Mexican grandfather, his mother's father in Mexico, and try to find out what his life was like. And finally, Diana Marie Delgado, who writes some great poetry for our collection, one of them being about the abuse that she faces in her father and her father's relationship with her mother, but also another poem that talks about her grandmother and how her grandmother was in many ways someone she looked up to.
Okay, we'll go to the readings now.
Hola, everybody. My name is Stephanie Elizondo, and I'm honored to share the middle and the end of my contribution to Nepantla Familias. It is called Dia de Muertos. 8 days after burying my father's ashes, I unlocked my condo and anxiously unzipped my suitcase. To my relief, his old snare drum had survived the flight. It had hung in the garage for decades, and when we pulled it down after the funeral, Mom and I were surprised to find the remnants of a bumper sticker that said Midwestern Music and Art Camp, 1954, in faded script. I placed the drum in the corner of my office, then continued unpacking until I came across his dog tag. We found enough of these engraved tin plates in Dad's dresser for each of us to take one home. Where should I put mine? I circled my house a few times before setting it atop the drum for safekeeping. Did it with my eulogy, which I rolled like a scroll. Then a neighbor knocked on the door, proffering a bag of my mail. Sympathy cards awaited inside, so lovely, I couldn't just toss them in a box. I stacked them atop the drum, but that wasn't right either, since only the top one was visible, so I fanned them out in a half moon around the drum. This made my eyes sting. I went to the kitchen to brew some tea, then halted at the cabinet, where I'd hung some roses upside down from the handle. Dad sent us roses every single Valentine's Day of our lives. Grabbing the dried flowers, I hurried back to the office and laid one between each card. Then I took the large frame photograph I'd been given by the funeral home, Dad in a denim shirt, smiling on the Alaskan Railroad, and propped it atop the drum, along with votive candles. This was not a ritual I had observed in childhood. Mom kept photos of family who died atop the piano, but that was the extent of ancestral veneration in our home. I briefly wondered if it was appropriate to honor Dad this way, given his ambivalence to Mom's Mexican culture, but before I knew it, I was talking to his photograph. This made me laugh. A year before Dad entered the care facility, Mom told me she overheard him chatting away in his bedroom one night. At first, she thought he was on the phone, but then she remembered he'd forgotten how to use it long ago. When she opened his door to ask what he was doing, he said, "Talking to Stephanie," and tapped my framed photo. Traveling to Mexico had taught me the schizophrenia of being biracial, of straddling two worlds but belonging to neither, might actually be the most Mexican thing about me. I mean, Mexicans have been struggling to navigate their blending of indigenous and Spanish bloodlines for 500 years now. The single most uniting fact of our Mexicanidad is that it's a negotiation for us all. Some aspects of our identity we inherit, others we must pursue. That, at least, was how I tried to rationalize spending $67 on a Day of the Dead ceremony I found on Airbnb while in Oaxaca. Yes, it made me feel like a fraud, but this is how I had learned many aspects of my culture. If not from a trip, then a class. If not from a film, then a book. How will we ever recover from colonization, but to reclaim what we can, where we can, how we can, with hopes that our culture might better re-authenticate in the next generation? It proved to be moving, joining 9 strangers around an altar inside the home of a mixta curandera. Together, we wrote down the names of those we mourned on slips of paper, placed them on an earthen tray and breathed, sprinkled marigold petals and breathed, lit candles and breathed, burned copal and breathed, drank from a gourd of mezcal and breathed, dunked pan de muerto in chocolate and breathed, listened and cried and told stories and laughed and breathed. Later that day, I visited Oaxaca's cemetery, Panteón San Miguel. Families encircled the graves of their dead, scrubbing down the crypts with sudsy water and stringing papel picado from the trees. Every tomb had been decorated with photographs, bottles of mezcal, tamales wrapped in banana leaves, and row upon row of marigolds. Ranchera blasted from a nearby boombox. Padres were dancing with hijas, tias with tios, primas with primos, mommies with each other. Never will I decorate my parents' graves as lovingly, which is to say, as Mexicanly as this. Something pulled inside my chest. The cemetery was labyrinthine, but I plunked down on a slab of concrete just in time before the whale surged out. It soared above the water spigots where mammies filled their scrub buckets above each and every crypt. No one minded, for if there was ever a time or a place to bawl in public, it was November 2nd at Panteón San Miguel in Oaxaca. And so I sobbed until my eyeballs threatened to slip from their sockets, until I felt faint from exhaustion before staggering away from my perch. Maybe 20 feet away was a tomb presided over by a man with a slick back shock of white hair, wearing a guayabera. He was holding on to the top of his cane so he could sit upright. His family was gathered around him. When my eyes met his, he solemnly nodded. He could tell my heart felt a little bit lighter, because suddenly it did. Saludos.
This is Francisco Cantu, reading from my essay, Calle Martín de Zavala. My mother and I arrived in Monterrey, Nuevo León, with a handful of photographs and place names connecting us to a long-buried family history. Records of ancestors and landscapes almost as obscure to us as ghosts. On the morning of my 34th birthday, we walked through a quiet neighborhood just outside the Barrio Antiguo along Calle Martín de Zavala, a street that, after carrying many names through the centuries, now bore that of an early colonial governor. As we walked past homes with newfangled exteriors and cinder block additions, it was hard to imagine that we were, in fact, walking along the same street where our forebears had lived before their eventual flight to the border, the same street where my mother's grandparents had celebrated their wedding at the turn of the last century, and where her father was born on the eve of the Mexican Revolution. My mother has few memories of her father. Growing up, she possessed a single photograph of him as a young man dressed as a Mexican charro, squinting under a broad sombrero with a pencil-thin mustache and cigarette hanging loosely in his fingers. When she finally arrived in San Diego to knock on his door at age 17, she could barely believe that the portly man who stood before her was actually him, the man who helped breathe her into existence. Their meeting did not portend a new understanding of one another. For her father, it would always remain easier to not speak of the past, to not leave oneself vulnerable to what had long ago been left behind, unchangeable and impossible to explain. For my mother, who lived most of her life devoid of any stories of her Mexican family, a trip to Monterrey was a chance for reclamation. My mother and I hoped to find, somewhere on Calle Martín de Zavala, the facade of a building that might still resemble the pocket-sized photograph we had of the family home taken in 1912, a crooked image of a 2-story Spanish-style row house with wrought iron window bars and balcony railings. Under the early October sun, we made our way past countless homes, searching for matching features, but few of them maintained any of their historic traits. After nearly half an hour, we stopped at an impromptu taco stand erected on the doorway of a neighborhood home. "Pasen a comer adentro," a woman called to us from inside, para que no les pegue el sol. We took a seat at the woman's dining room table as she began heating tortillas on her kitchen stove, listing the various guisos we could choose for our tacos. As she prepared our order, we told the woman that we were walking the street looking for the house where my mother's father was born. We handed the black and white photograph to her. She squinted and then quickly passed it back to us, waving her hand dismissively. "All the viejitos who remember what things looked like back then are long dead," she told us. My mother and I ordered a round of tacos, and the woman began to tell us how she had inherited her home. She wasn't from Monterrey, but had come to this street to care for her tia when she became immobilized by old age. She had grown up high in the Sierra, she told us, in a town called Rayones. As a child, her father worked in the pecan orchards, and her mother sold bread and sweets made from the nuts. But as she became older, her family slowly began to come down from the mountains to work in the citrus fields of Monte Morelos. Eventually, many of them moved on to Monterrey, abandoning forever the mountain passes, the pines, the clean air, the towering spires of limestone. Never in all my years did I think I'd end up on a street like this in the middle of the city, she told us. Pero uno nunca sabe dónde va a caer. It wasn't until several days later that I would realize how this woman had shared with us, over 2 plates of tacos, more about her life and the place she came from than my grandfather had ever shared with us about his own. My mother, having inherited so little from her father, was being made to search for him through a haze. But after all, when ancestors fail to share their stories with us, we go looking for them nonetheless.
This is Diana Marie Delgado, and I'm reading Garden of Jessamine. I am repairing silverfish on his station of the cross when Jesus pulls me onto his lap. Someone sees, and he leaves through the screen door with a slam, shouts, "Liar." I hide my nakedness inside his belly, a thatch of olive fields. My father walks in boxers, waiting for my mother to fry him potatoes with a black eye. On one side of his face, where hope is written, a speck of me appears that he never sees. Can you forgive that? Thank you.
Okay, and I'd like to just say a couple of words about the Wittliff Collections for those of you who aren't familiar with this place. We hold the archives for many leading writers, including Sandra Cisneros, Cormac McCarthy, John Recchi, who you heard me mention earlier from El Paso, along with Sergio Troncoso. We also have a very rare 1555 edition of Cabeza Vaca's La Relación. This is the first written account on what is now Texas in the Southwest, and it's an amazing story of this man who landed as a greedy conquistador and was transformed by his interactions with the Native Americans that he lived among for 8 years and became a passionate defender of Native American human rights. It's a very rare volume, one we're very proud to have. And the Wittliff Collections has this great literary book series. We published many notable volumes in it, including Hecho en Tejas, the first major anthology devoted to Texas Mexican writers, which you see behind me here. And actually, I mentioned earlier, we are selling copies of Nepantla Familias through our online gift shop here at the Wittliff. And we are also having a special sale for copies, hardback copies of Hecho en Tejas, which are very hard to find now. They're very scarce, and we have a good stock of those. So we've got those on sale. And one other thing about the Wittliff I want to mention here is that we have developed a very strong collection devoted to Texas music in recent years. And our Texas music curator, Hector Saldana, has prepared just a brief video to tell you about one of the great, really extraordinary collections we have here. So we're going to go to that.
Hi, I'm Hector Saldana, music curator at the Wittliff Collections at Texas State University. The Texas Music Collection is blessed to have a fantastic Tejano music archive. Principally, it's held within the Ramon Hernandez Tejano Music Collection, but also represented in Joe Nick Patowski's personal papers for his book about Selena, Como la Flor, and also within sheet music of the Zenobio Hernandez collection. Within Ramon Hernandez's collection, perhaps the foremost Tejano music collection in the country, you will see the history of Tejano and conjunto music played out, beginning from the 1920s all the way to modern times. What I'm proud to have here at the Wittliff Collections is to offer researchers the ability to go deep into the story of artists such as Flaco Jimenez, Lydia Mendoza, Isidro Lopez, Valerio Longoria, Narciso Martinez, and to see where this music that blended elements of classical Spanish music, ranchera, and also German music and polka, how it came to be and how it evolved into the modern era. It encompasses more than 250 boxes, 175 linear feet of materials, sound recordings, albums, posters, memorabilia, costumes, and even unusual items like the famous legendary musician Esteban Jordan's eye patch. I think for researchers, it's the chance to look at invaluable interviews that Ramon conducted. It's a chance to look at sheet music from over the years, rare records, and to consider very effectively Tejano music's role in the overall Texas music scene. Some of the most intriguing and valuable items within the Ramon Hernandez Tejano Music Collection are interviews with Little Joe Hernandez of Little Joe y La Familia, and before that, the Latinaires, to many photographs never published before on Selena. Ramon worked as a publicity agent for many groups, and as a journalist, he wrote about any up-and-coming Tejano artist. The Tejano Archive at Texas State University allow you to learn about the most famous artists, but also some of the regional and local favorites. It's an amazing resource for visitors, students, just anyone that wants to learn more about Tejano music. They can do it here at the Wittliff Collections.
Okay, great. And we're back again with Sergio. And can you talk about the next three writers who we will be hearing from?
So we're going to be hearing from Lorraine Lopez, who wrote a very funny piece, Nobody's Favorite, about the humor of really not fitting in within her family. And I love this piece for its humor, and it's grouped together with other pieces that are funny. And then also from Octavio Quintanilla, I think a poet that is going to have a great future. He wrote 2 poems for us, and his poetry is rife with unreal images and a questioning of the self. And I love that metastable relationship that is really at the heart of Nepantla and Nepantla Familias. And finally, from Irene Lara Silva, who is a wonderful writer. And it's all about shifts in perspectives and identity and time and realities. And there's sort of a dreamlike quality to her work that I've always loved. And she wrote Border as Womb, Emptied of Night Swallows. And so I think we're going to hear from her right now.
Okay, we'll go to the readings then.
Hi, my name is Lorraine Lopez, and I'm going to read from my essay, Nobody's Favorite, that appears in Nepantla. I was born an in-between child to a family from an in-between culture at an especially in-between time. The bilingual and bicultural Hispanos in Nuevo Mexico, my parents tilted more toward the New World than the Old. Our ancestors immigrated from the Iberian Peninsula to Veracruz and then up from Mexico into what is now the American Southwest prior to the founding of Jamestown. My mother and father, Espiridiana and Espiridion Lopez, considered their forebears to be Americans from a time before America existed. And though they cherry-picked from new and old world traditions, they dove into U.S. culture with gusto. Having witnessed the corporal punishment of classmates for speaking Spanish, as schoolchildren, they determined that ours would be an English-speaking home and use their first language as adults' only code. In terms of diet, though, Mexico prevailed. My mother rolled tortillas by hand. She roasted, peeled, and pureed mouth-excoriating peppers. She prepared frijoles, enchiladas, and caldos on a regular basis. Even so, cultural patterns such as machismo and marianismo failed to work for my assertive mother and somewhat passive father, making my parents outliers in the extended family, distant beyond the fact that they relocated from New Mexico to California before their first child was born in the 1950s. The second of their 5 children, I imagine my birth occurred for my parents as an afterthought, somewhat anticlimactic to the brilliant idea that was my older sister, Debbie, whose dimply smile and easy charm cast into sharp relief my unspectacular looks and woeful nature. My arrival also provided something of a throat-clearing preamble to the song of joy that was my brother Kenny, my mother's only son, and practically the whole point of having children as far as she was concerned. My father, a man ahead of his time in many ways, claimed he wanted only daughters. After Kenny, he was rewarded with 2 more, Frances, his favorite, and Sylvia, the youngest, La Consentida, everybody's darling. In our extended family, especially on the paternal side, naming favorites proved a common practice. So my father made no secret of his preference. My mother diplomatically insisted we were equally special to her, and her pants should have burst into flames with that one. From her moony gazes to the honeyed tones she used to address my brother, anyone could tell she was lying. My mother also hero-worshipped her firstborn, the tastemaker in our household. After purchasing an orange velveteen chair that caused my older sister to wince, Mom hesitated to buy as much as a dish towel without first consulting Debbie. My father, far more obvious with his favoritism, often announced at the dinner table that he had only one girl, whereupon my younger sister Frances would wriggle with delight. A chronic teaser, Dad often tried to make us jealous of one another. Following Debbie's lead, I ignored these mealtime proclamations, but secretly I was glad not to be his only girl. Yeah. That he failed to get a rise out of me no doubt put him off. Plus, it's hard to warm to a contemptuous child, and I, like my mother, would send many severe looks his way. Both of my parents and Debbie heaped adoration on the baby of the family. At 4 or 5, Sylvia would slip on a plastic grass skirt left over from Halloween and clip a single strand of pink yarn about a yard or so to the top of her pixie doo for her long, lustrous hair. Then she'd bust a move, something between the hula and a somnambulous shuffle, while shouting, "Hawaii, Mexico, Hawaii, Mexico," over and over. At this, my mother, father, and Debbie would beam and beat hands together as if Sylvia had just delivered a virtuoso performance at the Hollywood Bowl. "Oh, come on," I'd say. "That's not even a song. She's just shouting the names of 2 places that aren't even next to each other." Sylvia, in fact, took on the role of family pet literally. And when not entertaining us in her grass skirt, she pretended to be a dog, crawling around, panting, barking, wagging her behind, another length of pink yarn, her tail, pinned to the waistband of her shorts. Good doggy, Debbie would say, patting Sylvia's head. You are not a dog, I'd tell her, worried that this little routine of hers might delay our acquisition of an actual dog or even a cat. When we finally got a puppy, I was meanly pleased that the noisy nipper terrified my youngest sister, who quickly gave up her canine act. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Quintanilla, and I'm going to read a poem included in Nepantla Familias, edited by Sergio Troncoso. The title is Why You Never Get in a Fight in Elementary School. In this country, everything about you is foreign, and no one likes the look of scarcity. You want to tell them that when you draw a river on a piece of paper, a fish always jumps out of it, and you're always ready to catch it as it leaps out of the page. You are the fish, and yet you're not the fish. You are this, a kid, and the home you knew begins to fill with water. There goes the chair where your father sat to eat his dinner by the light of the kerosene lamp. There goes the only memory you have of your mother's feet. You want to tell them that the ocean where you stand on is not an ocean. It is your new country, where your body will be lifted by all the ways of missing someone, lifted by all the sounds. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Irene Lara Silva, and I'm reading to you today from a short story titled Border as Womb, Emptied of Night and Swallows, which was inspired by a line of poetry by Rodney Gomez. I followed you here. I'd follow you anywhere. My father said it wasn't right, that we had it backwards, that it was the woman who was supposed to follow her husband. But that never mattered to me. I'd never do anything that would keep us apart. What I am is yours. I am yours even when you are away, when I am alone. I am yours for as long as I breathe and even after. I am yours for as long as you want me. Memory brought you here, brought us here. Your history is here, your family, your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, your siblings and nieces and nephews. When we were in Ithaca, all you could talk about was how much you missed them, how much you missed this land and the endless horizons and the wind and the heat and the sunsets and the rose-colored fog in the morning and the sugarcane burning and the river and driving to South Padre Island and the roasted corn and the shaved ice with syrup and el patos and the botanas and the chorizo from San Manuel and the taquitos de trompo served with frijoles a la chara and baked potatoes and the cabrito al carbón on the other side of the border. You missed everything, even the scent of the air and the heat of the nights and the feel of the earth. To you, the Rio Grande Valley wasn't simply a place on a map. The name itself was an incantation, earth and sun and magic all at once. I promised you I'd follow you. To love you is to live here. The palm trees lining the highways and the fruit-bearing trees and the orange groves and the mesquites everywhere all whisper your name to me. Most nights when you're at work, I go for long drives. On the freeways where all the lights blur, the access roads when I want to see things pass by more slowly. Interstates, state roads, county roads, farm to market roads, connecting one town to the next. Some towns hardly more than a city limit sign, 2 houses and a gas station. Some nights I turn onto Caliche roads, counting the lights of trailer parks, surprised suddenly by what looked like little houses with parking lots and too many cars. Some of them bars without permits, most of them brothels. I sit at truck stop diners drinking cup after cup of coffee. I have something sweet, pancakes or pie or cake, then more coffee until I can bear to go back out again and devour the miles. Windows open and the road screaming past, Everywhere I see roadside descansos, wooden crosses piled with plastic flowers and ribbons and beads, all the tattered and bright colors of someone's grief. Some nights I listen to the radio, and then I'm almost happy. I shout, sing along, doesn't matter what it is, top 40, country music, the songs I remember from the 90s, The Cure, The Cranberries, New and Old Tejano, Michael Salgado and Intocables and Old Conjuntos, Los Relápagos and Los Tigres del Norte and Los Cadetes de Linares looping over and over again. When the whispers began, I tried to outrun them. First on the treadmill, then at the university track. I tried weights. I tried punching the bag in the garage. I tried drinking at home and then at the bar down the street, and then at the ice house on the far edge of town. I thought about going across the border to the bars in Reynosa or Progreso, thought about how it wasn't safe anymore, thought about how, even on good days, it pissed me off to deal with the border patrol and the checkpoints. I didn't grow up like you. I wasn't used to their omnipresence, to the constant questioning of my citizenship. I thought I might take a swing at one of them if I was drunk. So I stayed away from the bridges that would take me across. I stayed on the roads, listened to the wind and the music. I'm always home by the time the sun rises, early enough to shed all of my clothes and warm our bed, and for my eyes to become bleary with sleep before you arrive. I hear your car park in the driveway, hear your keys at the door, hear you make tea and drink it in the kitchen, hear the groan when you take off your shoes. And you sit there for a bit and breathe. And when you come to bed, I greet you with open arms and hold you tight. You tuck your face into my neck, and I breathe in the scent of your hair. And you tell me about your day. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry. And we lie there, breathing together until the alarm goes off, and I have to leave you. Get showered and dressed, go to work. I sleep enough, I guess. I stay awake all day. I sleep on the nights you're home with me. The rest of the time, it's an hour here, an hour there. I start awake, find myself patting my own chest, feel a phantom warmth smaller than the palm of my hand over my heart. Gracias.
Okay, those are terrific. Love seeing the readings and hearing these voices from the anthology. And I'll mention again that we are taking questions, which Sergio will be happy to address at the end of our program here. So feel free to submit your questions. Next up, Sergio, we have your interview. Can you talk about this?
Oh, with Sandra Cisneros.
Yes.
Oh, it was a great interview. I loved chatting with her. And I think we really connected. And I was, I'm a deep admirer of Sandra Cisneros and love her work, and was thrilled when she submitted an unpublished poem, Jarceria Shop for our anthology. And so it was just a delight talking about her poem, talking about the craft of creating this poem, going over the images that she shared with me, and we talk about them in the interview. So it was just, a highlight of my year to be able to spend a few minutes with her.
Yeah, it's a really love seeing the interview. And I'll mention that what we're going to show here is about a 7-minute segment of this interview that you did with her, but the full, I think it's about 35-minute interview. It is part of Sandra's archive at the Wittliff Collections now, and part of your archive as well. So, if you come do research here, you're able to view the entire thing. But for now, let's go to this edited interview.
So, I created this anthology, the Nepantla Familias, an anthology of Mexican-American literature on families in between worlds, because my first reaction was I saw so much talent out there and was not getting enough attention. And I really wanted also new work and wanted work that had not been published before. So I was really picky, and I'm glad it's getting such a great reception at the moment. And I was thrilled, absolutely thrilled that you decided to contribute your poem, Jarceria Shop. And you sent me some pictures too, which I've been looking at, and I even created a little PowerPoint presentation in case you want to share the screen and show them, and we can do that in a few minutes.
Yeah, because people even in Mexico don't know what a jarceria shop is. You know, they're disappearing. And when I moved here 8 years ago, that was my favorite. It still is my favorite store. You know, if I have to buy a gift for anybody, but I always run out of money because they don't take credit cards. It's a little, you know, in efectivo solamente. So every time I go there, I wind up with too many things. And I always say, la señora, ¿cuánto le debo ahora? You know, make sure I have enough efectivo because I'm always buying stuff I don't need. But like, how can you say no to a pumice stone that came from a volcano?
Do you want to take a look at your pictures just to get people in the mood, and then we can talk about your poem?
Yeah.
So here's the first picture you sent me, Mesón de San José.
Yeah. It's on Calle Hidalgo, just off of downtown.
And here's the next one that you sent me.
San Miguel de Allende, yes.
San Miguel de Allende. Here's another one.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
1945. Wow.
It was not at that location, the owners told me, but they are from a family that has had a jarceria store since 1945. And it's like stepping into 1945. That's why I like it. You know,
yeah. And these little santos, what are they made of?
They are wood carved. There's San Francisco and San Pascual, which is the patron saint of chefs. San Pascual Bailon, they call him. And they have a festival here where like people get dressed up and, you know, los locos, they dress up and men dress like women and women dress like animals and cartoon characters. They just dance in the streets. San Pascual. Cool. Mira esos cochinos. Look at those little banquitas, you know, like to milk your cow. But who doesn't need one of those in your bathroom?
I have one from San Elizario.
Ándale, look at that with molinillos in the corner and wooden spoons.
Oh my gosh.
And I love the mecate hairy string. There's like spools of that. I almost bought that yesterday, but I ran out of money. And there's little wooden hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Here's another one.
Here's the owner, and you know, she's of the familia, the original family. So she knows me. I always go in there and I just get babas looking at all the stuff. I want it all. I thought you would enjoy that. So
I loved it. In fact, you know, I said I'm going to put it together in a little PowerPoint, and so we can share it and see, you know, see all the beautiful pictures that you. Because for me, these images took me home, took me to Juarez, took me to, you know, los puestos de my tía Romita, and I know for you, it's where you live. It's in San Miguel.
That's why I wrote the poem, because I originally started the poem when I just got here, and I was like, and you know, so the poem started out very different. But then I realized after I'd put it to sleep and came back that I wasn't being honest, that I needed to be more honest about this kind of adoration of the cotidiano, of the everyday, that only a person who's Chicana could see it that way, you know, and I had to, you know, there's a nostalgia, a super hype and mythification of the cotidiano.
Absolutely.
The Mexicans don't feel, and the gringos, of course, don't have it in their DNA to have this kind of feeling. So when I came in, I was like, and now after I finished the poem, I started being more honest and saying, come on, you know, you're kind of glorifying this. Let's be honest about your position as someone who lives as afueras.
Right. No, and I remember those objects in your poem, like el molcajete, you know, but you're going to use it as a bird bath. And and then
and
the carrizo baskets that, you know, that can carry a kilo. And you say, as if I could do it, but I'll send somebody else to do it for me. And so tell us a little bit about your poem, because I think this is fascinating.
You know what, the poem began, like I said, puro adoración, where every time I would see something real puro Mexicano, you know, when I just got here, it was like, whoa, the smell of nixtamal. You know, I would just stop and buy a kilo of tortillas just for the pure joy of sniffing them. You know, it's just like everything was filled with like a Proustian cookie, like Proustian Madeleine. And then when I put the poem to sleep, I didn't feel like it was going anywhere. It was just puro adoration. Then I took it back out, and that's when I realized, oh, wait a second, you're so privileged. You're buying these things and you're not going to even use them for the original reasons they're sold for. You have to be honest about that privilege that comes with being a woman who earns from her pen. She doesn't have to sell tortillas or wash a man's underwear. You know, you have to admit that privilege. So that started coming in the poem, even though I didn't like that snapshot of me. It was true.
But it's that honesty that is so appealing to me.
That's poetry. If you don't tell the truth, it ain't a poem in my book. That's why the politicos do not write poetry, because for them, it's all about like swerving and quedar
it's PR,
bien.
it's propaganda.
Para quedar bien. And you cannot quedar bien in a poem. A poem is going to be showing you a mirror to a self you may not like.
Right.
You may not like. So this poem to me came out completely different how I thought. And I didn't exactly like it, but I thought, hey, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Ni modo, right? So, but I went somewhere that I didn't expect. And that's what a poem has to do. You know, it has to go someplace else than what you begin with and take you to a deeper truth. That's why poetry is so necessary in this time.
I don't want to keep you, Sandra. You've been absolutely wonderful.
Oh,
and I will treasure this conversation forever.
Thank you. And Nawi has been sitting very quietly on my lap.
Chulo.
Yeah, she's a little, this is like, you know how they tell me, you know, they ask, Sandra, have you found love in San Miguel? I say, yes, I have. True love. Finally. Happy at last.
Happy at last.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Sergio.
Okay, well, that was fun to see. What a great conversation, you and Sandra. And okay, and so now we have two more writers we'd like to hear from. These are the last two readings we have for this program, and then we will be going to the questions. Can you go ahead and set these up for us, Sergio?
So Diana Lopez wrote a terrific short story called Dutiful Daughter about Juanita being a phlebotomist and the self-confidence she's trying to gain, you know, for herself, this protagonist, and how in some ways her family hobbles her, and she's trying to overcome that. So I think it's a great piece on this, you know, yin yang of family traditions versus moving forward in your own life. And Severo Perez, you know, wrote Melancholy Baby, another great story, in which this young 15-year-old Oscar Buscoso, and by the way, Buscoso, what does it mean? It means to keep searching, to keep asking questions. So always asking questions of the priest about religion and not being satisfied with the answers. And so I think this piece is perfect for that, of someone questioning the religion given to you by your ancestors.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Diana Lopez, and I'm going to read an excerpt from my story, Dutiful Daughter. Juanita stepped into the outpatient clinic at Spawn. She wore scrubs, but she wasn't a doctor or nurse. She didn't carry a stethoscope. She carried a tray with needles and tubes, and that was okay because orderlies didn't carry anything. Maybe she wasn't a doctor or nurse, but she wasn't an orderly either. She was a phlebotomist. She liked saying it, phlebotomist. At first, Juanita thought it was spelled with an F, but when she learned it was spelled with a P, she straightened up a little. Lots of medical jobs were spelled with P: podiatrist, practitioner, pediatrician. Other jobs started with P, but not the P sound: psychologist, physician, physical therapist. Originally, she wanted to be a forensic scientist, which did start with the letter F, just like it sounded, but she didn't think she could graduate from college, then graduate again, then do rotations, and take a national exam. She went to Del Mar Community College instead, and she didn't have to graduate or do rotations or take a test for the certificate. Hi, Juanita. This from the client care specialist, the CCS. She didn't need any college for her job. I got the order for the lab. The patients in the lobby glanced up, saw Juanita's tray, and flinched. She could tell they understood her job now, even if they didn't know her official title, phlebotomist. Lots of people didn't know that word, but they knew other words. That's why when she first stepped into the clinic, Juanita pretended. She wore scrubs, so it was easy. In those few seconds before the CCS or someone else called her out, the patients, she hoped, had spotted her and thought to themselves, there's the doctor. But since she was young, if they thought, There's the nurse. That was okay too. Juanita grabbed the order, then stepped through swing doors to a hallway lined with examination rooms. A chair was there and a scale. Even now, a patient stood on it while a nurse, a male nurse, fiddled with the weights. "I'm looking for Mr. Jefferson," Juanita said. The man getting weighed said, "You here to take my blood?" "Yes, sir, if you don't mind." "Of course I mind." He smiled when he said this. The nurse wrote down the weight, then asked Mr. Jefferson to sit, then put a blood pressure cuff on his arm. "I'll be done in a bit," he told Juanita. "That's okay," she answered, even though she was bothered. Why'd she have to wait? The cuff got tight on Mr. Jefferson's arm, then started to hiss as it deflated. Juanita wondered how it worked, what the top and bottom numbers of the blood pressure meant. It wasn't part of the program at Del Mar. Maybe that's why she had to wait, because she didn't know stuff like this. The nurse wrote more numbers on Mr. Jefferson's chart and took a step back. Juanita peeked at his badge. LVN. No big deal, though obviously he thought it was. She couldn't worry about it. She had work to do. She grabbed a purple top and a red top. Then she twisted a needle into the vacutainer tube. "You're a regular vampire, aren't you?" Mr. Jefferson said. "I'm not a vampire, more like a mosquito." This made him laugh. She lifted the armrest, then she propped Mr. Jefferson's arm on it, tied the tourniquet over his bicep, and tore open an alcohol swab. His eyes got wide, but he didn't say anything. "You're gonna feel a little prick," she said, getting the needle ready, then winking, "just like a tiny mosquito bite." She wasn't lying. She had the touch. No pain at all for most patients. There wasn't much to understand about her job, but she knew this: blood was warm, and veins, healthy ones, bounced back. Veins from patients on prednisone were hard to pin because of excess tissue fluid, which made them float around. Veins from drug addicts felt like cords from the scars. And a good stick meant the blood softly gushed out, while a bad stick meant it came out in squirts. Juanita rarely had a bad stick. Juanita could get blood from a rock.
San Antonio was a very unique place. Because of the military bases, it provided income for a lot of Latinos that normally, would not have access to those kinds of jobs, a good steady job with health insurance and things like that. We lived in a world that was kind of in between. It was not the full Anglo world of let's say Alamo Heights, but it's and it wasn't quite the west side of the deep west side. So there was a mixture of working class whites and working class Latinos living in the same neighborhoods, and it was a neighborhood in transition as well. So in a certain sense, I was raised in this in-between world. I went to Little Flower School from kindergarten until the 10th grade, like melancholy babies. I lived in that world. I lived in that environment of being a Catholic school kid, wearing a uniform every day, being totally involved, immersed in that. In my school friends and the society around the church, all the activities I had some kind of connection to the school or the church. The Boy Scouts and all these kinds of things were all affiliated with the school and the church. I was a very nerdy kid. I was not interested. First, I couldn't participate in sports like the other boys. So I spent a lot of time thinking. And, that's the story of Melancholy Baby. I was really wondering about the existence of God. And this priest shows up one day to teach us religion in the 10th grade. The poor guy, I don't know, I mean, how he ended up. He was not one of the Franciscan priests that were the priests of Little Flower. He came from somewhere else. He didn't dress like them. They dressed in brown robes and sandals, and he wore, a black suit with a clerical collar. He was really not prepared to be dealing with teenagers. And I was really curious. And unfortunately, he set up the ground rules on the first day. He said, question everything, question even me. Well, that to me was like a license to steal. And of course I was going to question him. So it just reached a point where I frustrated the poor man. And that moment when he asked me, if you know so much, why don't you teach this class? And he forced me to stand up and read from the book. And since I'm dyslexic, that was like ultimate punishment, but I was just too damn stubborn. I was not going to give him the satisfaction. And of course, the class was hating me at that moment because why? They had to sit there and suffer through my humiliation, which was self-inflicted. So at that moment, when we get into the moment about the pronunciation of melancholy, is when I couldn't help myself. I just started singing, come to be my melancholy baby, cuddle up and don't feel blue. And of course, the class just broke up in laughter, and I was asked not to return.
Hello. Well, that was so much fun, and so many great readings. And we do have some questions. I will mention again that you've seen this beautiful book, and it's even more beautiful when you open it up and see the signature here inside. And yes, that is what we have here at the Wittliff Collections. As I mentioned earlier, our operators are standing by. But wait, there's more. We also have these really nifty bookmarks that Sergio Troncoso had made that we will include with each copy that we sell. So keep that in mind. And I believe in the chat we have the information about ordering. So Sergio, let's get to some of the questions that have come in. Jessamine wants to know, how did you decide to place the works in this book? You spoke a bit on why you placed the first piece read in the beginning, David Romo's piece. Was there an emotional journey that you were trying to convey with a certain order?
Well, that's an excellent question, Jessamine. And I was really, when I had the 30 pieces, I played with the order so often and read and reread them, not just individually, but then started reading them in groups. And I put it together in a way that was ordered, but also in a way that I had a musical metaphor. For me, it was almost like an emotional wave that I was trying to create and sustain. Because as an editor, the only thing you control, of course, in terms of the order, is if somebody reads it from start to finish. And people often pick a poem here, pick a short story there, or an essay here, and then just jump around. So I started with things that seduced the reader into Nepantla, and also brought up the questions of what's at stake for us, trying to create our identities, trying to wrestle with these questions and problems. And then it went into people looking for this answer perhaps abroad, and then some identity issues on machismo. And so it was sort of like an emotional wave I was trying to sustain as you read. And then at a certain point, it's humorous. The humorous side of Nepantla and the searching. And then toward the end of those pieces, I brought in a very hard piece, a piece that is not about humor, that sort of wakes up the reader, that says, sometimes there are no easy resolutions. So throughout, and then sometimes I connected one piece from the other. The beginning is nonfiction essays, and then poetry, and in short stories, sometimes the pieces are connected by a single word that is very important in the piece preceding it and is repeated and is important maybe from a different angle in the next piece. And so I tried to arrange and rearrange the pieces to give the reader this sort of emotional, almost musical journey through Nepantla. And toward the end, we even have some pieces that are exploring metaphysical issues of Nepantla, not just between countries or languages or ancestors' demands versus your new demands as let's say an American, but issues of life and death, metaphysical issues of Nepantla. And so that some of those pieces are grouped together to even take that journey to unexpected places. So it was, I would call it almost like trying to create an album in a musical wave, and really always focusing on the reader. How would I get the reader into this journey, keep the reader riveted from piece after piece after piece, and then take the reader to an unexpected end? And so that was how I grouped the pieces together. So Jasmine, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and we have a few questions here now. The next one is from Ann Weisgarber, who I should mention is a very talented and acclaimed writer whose archives we are also very honored to have here at the Wittliff Collections. And it's great to have Ann join us here today. And Ann asks, Sergio, as you read all of the submissions, you have a range of writers from very established writers who've been around a long time, and then you have younger writers who are pretty fresh voices. And Ann wants to know, did the older writers focus on different themes than the younger writers?
I can't say that the older writers, we don't have any old writers in this collection, maybe people who are a little bit older, but if there's any kind of trend there, and I don't think there is a strong one, possibly the older writers were a tad bit more political, a tad bit more, just sort of, connected to the politics of the days or the issues that they wanted to bring into their stories. But frankly, I don't really even think that was much of a trend. What I like is the variety and people, young writers that I knew about, but for example, Stephanie Lee, whose father is Chinese and whose mother is Mexicana. And she's a great new voice that I hope should be heard. And then writers I knew, but we're thrilled that and they're younger writers, but Octavio Quintanilla, of course, and Irene Lara Silva, and all of these other writers that for different reasons. But I don't think there was a trend that the young writers wrote about this and the older writers wrote about that. It was just on this theme of Nepantla and how it plays out through your families. So I think that's probably what people focused on.
Mm-hmm. And we have a question from Mark, who said there was that photo of you in front of the library in El Paso with your name on it. Is there really a library named for you?
Yes. In a few years ago, I think it was in 2014, the city council, and I always proudly say unanimously.
So there wasn't a lot of controversy and debate then?
Not really. I mean, I don't know. I was called, I think, 3 or 4 days before the vote, and somebody from the council said, "We're voting on renaming the library, your local library, after you." And so I had to drop everything, find a flight, and show up. And I had no clue, whether it was going to be a debate, whether it was a decided issue, but they said, get over here. And so I did in 3 or 4 days. And the city council, I think to encourage younger readers to, it's a library that's within walking distance of my mother's house. My mother still lives in Isleta in an adobe house not far from that library. And it's a really heavily used library, and that's very important for that community. It's really the public university of that area, of a very working class area in El Paso and Isleta. you get free Wi-Fi. There are citizenship classes in that library. There's, of course, books. And once they named the library after me, I wanted to not just have a building named after me, but I started the Troncoso reading prizes. So I pay kids to read. I give out these prizes every December, in which 3 to high school kids and 3 to middle school kids. And whoever reads the most books from September to December, and the librarians are the ones who are logging in the books and talking to the kids, making sure they read it, get prizes: $125 for first prize, $100 for second prize, and $75 for third prize. I give 6 of these prizes every year. I fund them. I fly in. I give the kids and their families copies of my books, and it ends up becoming sort of a community event where people ask me about, how do you get to college? How do I help my kid focus on reading so that by the time they get to high school, they're doing well? So I answer all these questions from the parents and from the community that shows up, because it matters to me. These are kids who were me. Who I was them, when I was younger. And so it matters to me to have that effect on my community. And I'm very tied to Isleta and the east side of El Paso. And I'll always, as long as I'm alive, those prizes will be given out.
I'll mention that we did have a comment come in from Severo Perez, who says, "I'm really old." So there we go. And we have more questions. This one's from Sarah, who asks, how much of your work comes from your waking mind versus your dreaming mind?
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Sarah, because the introduction begins with a dream that I've had all my life since I was in Isleta as a kid. And that really was the dream of Nepantla. And the dream is really, for me, I'm on a beam and I'm surrounded by clouds, and I'm falling one way or I'm falling the other. And there's a sense of terror, but also excitement in this dream. And I don't know what happens. And then the dream repeats, and it's almost like it's on a loop. And I've had this dream as a kid. I've had this dream in college. I've had this dream, a few weeks ago. And I always envision this dream in a way as sort of a metaphor for Nepantla, between languages, between cultures, the push and pull of where I belonged, who was I, and should I listen to my parents? Should I adopt their values? What values should I adopt? What values should I jettison? Do I come back to the border? How do I come back to the border? And so for me, I think, frankly, being more in touch with your dream world is very important for a writer. I think I'm a little bit, every writer has an Achilles heel. My Achilles heel is I'm too analytical. I try to take things apart, and I'm good at math, and that's the way my brain is functioned. But as I've gotten older, I've listened and paid attention to my dreams and to intuition in a way that I think has been helpful to my work.
We have more questions coming in, which we are definitely going to get to. I just want to mention that a couple of questions came in for Irene, Lara Silva, and she's answering those via the chat mechanism. We didn't have her set up as a live participant here, so I'm sorry about that. It was, we're doing our best just to manage the technology, given our own levels of inexpertise in this regard. So Fernando asks, after writing a first draft, I find it difficult to fill in all the missing gaps in a story or poem during the revision process. What methods do you use to combat this?
Well, Fernando, that's a great question, because I teach a workshop, and revision is always part of that workshop. I think what I do, and it's all individual by writer, because some writers are very, putting on the editor's hat is very different from putting on the writer's hat when you're creating something new. So for me, I always write whatever I write new in the morning, as soon as I wake up, because my mind is fresh. The demands of the world haven't started distracting me. And I write until I get tired, 2 or 3 or 4 hours. And I only edit things in the afternoon, and I don't edit anything I just wrote, even something I wrote a week ago. So I try to create a distance between me and what I wrote. So sometimes I'm rewriting something I wrote a month ago, even 6 months ago. And I also try to even create a physical space that's different from where I write something new versus where I rewrite, to really get my mind in a very different frame, and to look at my work as an editor, which is what you have to do, be very brutal against your own work. So a lot of it is in removing your ego and not looking at it, oh my God, this is the next, Shakespeare or whatever, and I can't touch this poem, I can't touch this short story or essay, and you need to get away from that. And the quicker you learn that as a writer, that you really have to, whatever works for you, to develop that editor's hat, to be brutal and merciless with your own work. I think the quicker you will take the next steps into rewriting. So I would say at the very beginning, create a psychic, physical distance, a temporal distance from any work you revise. Don't revise something you just wrote. Do it a month or 2 weeks later. Write something new. Get something in between what you're revising versus what you're writing new, and then go back to that old piece and rewrite it.
And we have Diana asking, Sergio, gracias for putting together this amazing anthology. What do you think are ways of continuing to cultivate emerging Mexican-American writers?
Well, to cultivate it's hard. It's work. It's it's sitting down and encouraging Mexican-American writers that there is a place for your work, that people are listening, that there are writers like me and many others, probably every single writer in this collection, that will help younger writers, beginning writers, to give them, opportunities if they see an opportunity to give to younger writers. I also, by the way, funded the Sergio Troncoso First Fiction Award in the Texas Institute of Letters. It's not restricted to Mexican Americans, but it was thrilling that this year Mexican-American writer won it. And so I think we all have to do our part to be encouraging the younger emerging Mexican-American writers to be there and defend them, to make sure that they get at least a chance at that brass ring, whatever that brass ring is for you. And I think encouraging reading in our community. We have to develop and push, and we have to read each other's works and know each other's works. And I know that's a lot of hard work for everybody. And I am getting, sometimes dozens of books every week from people who want me to read their stuff. And I do my best, but you can't also read everything that's sent to you, because you otherwise wouldn't do anything else. So you do your best to give back to the community, and I think that's how you can encourage, young Mexican-American writers, and be writing work for the new community coming, the next generation coming forward. Be open-minded to something that hasn't been written before. I think all of those things will encourage new emerging writers from our Mexican-American community.
Yeah, it's such a great answer, because writing is an ego-driven process, but it's all about building community too. And you've been such a leader in that regard in so many ways. And I think people are getting a sense of that here today who weren't aware before, which is one reason we love, of course, being connected with you, Sergio. More questions are here. So we have Mary asking, what space or spaces does borderland or Nepantla themed literature occupy in literary theory?
Well, Mary, I would say ask a literary theorist. I'm not a literary theorist. I think you would probably have to ask an academic, for a real, considered answer for that. And there are plenty of them out there, but I'm not one. So, I'm sure, everyone really harkens back to Gloria Anzaldúa and how she introduced the concept. And she certainly is a mentor for me, and somebody very important that taught me about philosophy and how it applies to the Mexican-American experience. And for me, that was something I've been doing all my life. I started with the Germans and the French philosophers, but then I stumbled onto Anzaldúa, and I said, oh my gosh, she is actually applying philosophical concepts, that some of the Germans and French were talking about, to the Mexican American experience. And that's exactly what I wanted to do.
And let me mention that we have some pretty high profile academics who are part of our audience today. So if any of you wish to answer via chat, please feel free to do so. And we have another question from Jessamine, who wants to know, can you speak a little more on the last piece you selected in the book, the one that you said ended on a heavier note?
Well, it's Matt Mendes, and it's called The Astronaut. And one of the reasons I put Matt's story last was because it is this sibling who's trying to connect with somebody who's dead, with a sibling that has died, and it's almost trying to go to another dimension of Nepantla. Another reality, another borderland, a borderland between reality and what you might expect, either heaven or if you don't have a sense of heaven, the other side, whatever that other side is. And so I thought it was for me eye-opening and opened my mind to other ways of dealing with Nepantla, things that were not, expected, not typical of some of the other pieces. And so I thought it was sort of going into the metaphysical aspects of Nepantla, and that's why I wanted to leave people with that eye-opening last piece.
Gotcha. So we have a couple more questions here, and Cassie wants to know if you can talk about this really striking cover of this.
Well, let me tell you, this is a great cover, and I'm responsible for it. So I'm really thrilled about it. First it was Antonio Castro. He is a great graphic designer that came from, teaches at UTEP and has won graphic design awards. And he's also, for example, designed Everything Begins and Ends at the Kentucky Club by Benjamin Sainz. And he designed The Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son, a previous book of mine. He's really just a talented graphic designer. And the great thing about my collaboration with Steve Davis and the Wittliff is the Wittliff Collections agreed and decided to pay for Antonio's work and bring him into Texas A&M. So this collaboration was terrific.
Thanks to Texas A&M University Press too, which has been an exceedingly wonderful partner. The Aggies, I love how they're open-minded and they're responsive, and they just want to do great books. So working with them has been a joy in that regard.
Yeah, and editing. I repeatedly, I would get from writers, or I would find another little error or something, and Texas A&M Press was always responsive. Always, let's get this book perfectly right. And I think, we came at, maybe I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me they found the typo, but wow, they were a great partner to work with too. So that's how the cover came to be. And so Antonio Castro sent me this cover, and I love that it was a metaphor for what was going in the middle. It was, it harkened back to Anzaldúa and carrying this experience of the Mexican American community on your back. This model had a wound in the back from an actual car accident, but it's sort of a scar. So it spoke to these wounds that Mexican Americans have yet overcome. And then it has this wallpaper that divides, sort of a more typical, what Antonio described to be more typical Mexican wallpaper versus more American type of wallpaper, at least in Antonio's mind. And so all of these things, I think, made the cover perfect for what was the content inside. And so that's why, I love the cover, and I'm glad A&M Press, Texas A&M Press was behind it, and the Wittliff Collections was behind it. And that's how it came to be.
Yeah. And so the last question we have is from Keith, who asks, in his book, Homelands, Alfredo Corchado speaks of El Paso as the epicentro of his homelands, the U.S. and Mexico. In terms of both personal and collective identity, in your view, how does biculturalness and being in between play out?
Well, I mean, I grew up in El Paso too. And I think, the way I think it plays out is that you carry the border with you. The biculturalness, the binationalism, the bilingual life, you carry it with you, whether you stay in El Paso or whether you leave El Paso, you come back, or you leave McAllen and come back. I always carry it with me. And so to either to run away from that background or to not pay attention to how it's playing out in a place like Connecticut or playing out in the Ivy League, because it is. I think one of the things you find over time is that even for people who have stayed, the El Paso that I grew up with is very different from the El Paso today. And it's changing rapidly. So even staying geographically on the border, you're not going to have the same border that you had 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so you're definitely going to have a different kind of border if you travel to, internal in the US to Kansas City or to Boston, et cetera, but it's still going to be with you. And so I think in my mind, it's always that challenge of trying to piece yourself together from all the different experiences and influences you're getting throughout your life, linguistically, rural versus urban, the burgeoning, Mexican-American middle class, many of our readers that we have today, some maybe their parents did the pizca, just like I did, went and picked pecans or picked cotton or did migrant farm workers. But then you have children of people who have been here already for a while, like my kids, they identify as Mexican American, but they grew up in New York City. And so we have that next generation that I think we have to appeal to, and we also have to listen to, because they are important voices in our community as well. And it's the evolution of our community. I think that's what we always should be open to as writers.
Well said. And, I just want to say thank you to all of the writers who participated in the event that we had today. The readings were fantastic. Sandra, thank you for doing this interview with Sergio, which was such a tremendous thing to see. And I'm glad we got to show off some of the quality and the talent that's accumulated in this volume that you edited, Sergio. Thank you again for what you've done. Thank you to everybody for joining us here for Nepantla Familias. And we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.